Okay, so there's like a metric ton of videos I've been trying to get started for a while, and honestly I was going to work on some of those first since at least 2 of them were special requests. But given just how much I have to say about them and how much I have to do outside of this channel, it'll ironically take less time to talk about an entire season of television in broad strokes. Plus, Batman v Superman is coming out if it isn't out already by the time this video goes up, so I'd be insane not to talk about that too. So in other words, screw those in-depth reviews I had planned for other movies and shows, let's talk about comic book stuff. I'm sorry, I apologize, I'll get to it in a bit, I swear. I, like any sane person, loved Netflix series Daredevil. I don't quite see it as the magnum opus of the Marvel Cinematic Universe like a lot of others do, but it gave us another engaging hero, a darn near perfect villain, an interesting supporting cast, magnificent and visceral action, and a setting that felt complex and lived in. After last season saw the defeat and imprisonment of crime boss Wilson Fisk, Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, is on top of the world. He's taking out bad guys like no one's business, his relationship with his friend and partner Foggy Nelson has stabilized now that they both know his secret identity, and their business as attorneys is through the roof. Of course, things can't be happy for long, and when the one-man army that is the Punisher starts mowing down crime mobs, Matt takes it upon himself to bring the killer to justice. Even as someone who's never much cared for either of the characters outside of this series, I was fascinated to see how the Punisher and Daredevil would play off each other, as I've always seen them as the opposing extremes of the anti-hero archetype. Much to my pleasure, this series plays the two off each other perfectly, with their opposing philosophies, methodologies, and personalities making for some of the best scenes in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Helped in no small part by the fact that the writing, direction, and especially Jon Bernthal's performance goes out of its way to make Frank Castle a legitimately terrifying specter of death, even as he quickly gets more humanized and sympathetic. For as much as I'm now looking forward to the inevitable Punisher solo series, I'd be even more hyped for just a whole series of Matt Murdock and Frank Castle trading ideals. Unfortunately, the problem a lot of people seem to be having is that Matt and Frank's conflict doesn't take up the whole series. The reason being that outside of the Punisher, this season also introduces Matt's old flame Elektra. And to say that people are torn on Elektra is an understatement. I was frankly looking forward to Elektra just as much as I was the Punisher, as from the outset the two make great foils and serve parallel story purposes. On paper it works. Elektra and Frank Castle had the belief that killing is right drilled into them by circumstances, in contrast to Matt, who we know was totally selfless and altruistic as early as childhood, with incredibly vague reasons as to why that was. The problem is that the Punisher and Elektra plotlines never converge and are wholly separate through the whole show with the exception of maybe 2 scenes. My biggest disappointment of the whole season has to be that we didn't get a single scene of Punisher and Elektra on screen together, playing their similar but not identical philosophies against Matt's. I'm really fond of the trope where a trio of characters both complement and contrast each other philosophically, and while we get that with Matt, Karen, and Foggy like we did last season, not doing it with he, Frank, and Elektra was a missed opportunity. Either way, though I have fun when she's on screen, Elektra's plotline is the lesser of the two, seeming equal parts set up for future stories and an excuse for more action scenes. The action in this series is still amazingly choreographed, with one sequence basically being the famous hallway fight from last year but on steroids, so that's not exactly a problem. But what is a problem is that by episode 11, the Elektra side of things firmly overshadows the Punisher side, and I feel like we should have strived to keep a more even balance, if not just keeping Frank Castle firmly in the forefront. Getting back to the positives though, side characters like Foggy, Karen, Claire, Stick, Brett Mahoney, District Attorney Reyes, and the rest are all drawn strongly enough to make up for the fact that all the interesting supporting villains of last season are naturally all gone. Foggy in particular gets a lot of moments to shine that all feel natural to his character. Also worth noting is that there's a slight tone shift from last season, and though I spent a lot of time digging into the Elektra plotline, I do appreciate how much more comic book this whole season feels. There are some vague mystic elements introduced to this season, and that combined with the fact Punisher sometimes feels more like a force of nature or a horror movie monster than a man, helps this feel more thematically tied to the MCU. My guess is that after finishing this season, there will be far less viewers with trepidations about seeing Daredevil potentially share a room with Iron Man or Captain America than there were last year. Small problems aside, Daredevil Season 2 is just as remarkably well made, well acted, and well directed as its predecessor, but unfortunately there are a few more glaring issues than there were the first go-around. It's still a great total package, but fair warning, I personally think the season peaked around episode 3 and 4. And by contrast, the final 2 episodes are probably this show's weakest. Maybe it's just because I sort of knew what to expect going in this time, but I got more personal enjoyment out of it than I did the first season, so make of that what you will.